So today I'm going to talk a little bit about joinery. And the reason I chose this is because this is something that I think that I have researched and tried to figure out exactly how I was going to do things, where I was going to do things, and the tools and the things that I need to get the joinery done. And in particular, I'm going to talk about three things. One is dowels, two are dovetail joints, and three are pocket hole jigs or screws. Now, they all have individual applications. I've used them all, and I'll tell you that uh, the decision isn't always necessarily the right one or the perfect one or the strongest one. It's the one that you choose that you think is going to represent whatever you're doing at the end of the day in the most efficient way. Because obviously, when we're working in the wood shop or we're trying to get things done, we want to try to make them the most efficient for our project. So, the first one I'll talk about is the pocket hole screw. And here I have the Kreg Pro Pocket Jig. This is actually the second version that I bought. The first one was the one that you just clamp on. And that one worked well for very small and quick projects. But then I've moved on now and I got this Pro Pocket Jig, which is actually quite nice. You just take the piece of wood, you stick it in the jig, you pull the handle down, and you're automatically centered and you can screw the hole right away. These can be really quick and super efficient if you're making something like a cabinet or a built-in closet, for example. In fact, I just completed one here at my house, and I probably did about 40 of these pocket hole screws. The best thing about them is they're really quick to do. They line up really easily, and if you use the right screws, they can actually join the wood together quite nicely. The one consideration is that pocket hole screws are really not good for furniture, especially if you're going to show your furniture, much like this piece behind me. And the reason is that it doesn't really look that clean. Now they make these little dowels that actually go in. Frankly, I've never gotten them to work well, and I have never had a good time with them. But they really work well for things like cabinets and built-ins because you can hide those. Nobody's ever going to see them. So the pocket hole screws are perfect for those particular applications and not one that I chose for this particular piece. The next one I will talk about is the dovetail. Now, I've also used this in several applications, mainly for drawers. And the best thing about it is that they go together very, very nicely, and especially if you have a jig. Now, I did not have a jig when I first started, and I put my hand at cutting my own dovetails by hand. And let me tell you, that was an experience that I'm not really sure I want to repeat. I can really, really appreciate true craftsmanship for people that do hand cut dovetails. I just don't have the patience for it. So I actually purchased this the Porter Cable dovetail jig. And that thing has really made my life a ton easier. In fact, I built 10 drawers also for that same built-in closet that I did here at my home. And although it was a lot of dovetails, that machine makes it super efficient and it handles up to 12 inches. So that really works well for drawers. And it can make it really quick and easy for you to make a really strong joint. More importantly, these things line up almost perfect if you have the jig set up accurately. And all you need is a router and it's a piece of cake. You can do one of these in probably less than 30 seconds once you get used to it. Once you glue these joints together, it's nearly about as good as you can get. Then the third, and the one that actually is my preference more for furniture and pieces that I actually want to show where my joints are, I actually use dowels. In fact, I've actually used on this particular piece here close to 50 dowels, and in different ways. The first way, which is probably the most common way that you see dowels used, is to actually just join two pieces of wood together in parallel. And with a simple jig, a doweling jig, it makes your life 1,000 times easier. It's nearly impossible, if not just really time consuming, and also kind of a little bit uh, dangerous, maybe, if you're trying to finish off something and try to do this accurately without some kind of jig or tool. So I actually picked this up from Rockler. This is the Dowel-it, and it's very common, but it's great. It's self-centering. It takes up to, I think, an inch and a quarter size piece of wood, and it self-centers, and it goes from 3/16 of an inch to a half-inch dowel, and it's perfect. You clamp it on top of the wood here. You line it up with the line that you've made on your piece, and you simply put the drill in. The only thing you have to be mindful of is when you're drilling into the wood to make sure that you're actually drilling in exactly how far you want those dowels to be. So it just takes a little bit of calculation, but you can actually use a stop on your drill bit that allows you to make sure that each one is done in the same exact fashion. This takes a little bit of time, but the very first time I used this, I was able to put two pieces of wood together, put a little glue in there, and squeeze it together, and it lined up absolutely perfectly. The reason I have this particular piece in my hand is once I made the parallel dowels to join these pieces of wood together, because this is 16 inches wide. So I was able to do that just with the Dowel-it jig. Now, in this particular piece, I have a lot of through dowels, and I did a ton of research. And besides the fact that I didn't really want to spend a ton of money, I wanted to try to make it accurate so that when I wanted to put a dowel in through a piece on the top or on the side into the middle of a piece of wood in an accurate position, you need to really have some kind of jig that helps you to align that. If you do not have that absolutely perfect 90 degrees into the wood, you run the risk of the dowel going sideways or splitting out your wood. And particularly when you're finishing or assembling a piece, that can be really painful because you're almost at the end here for the assembly. And so what I ended up doing was, the pieces that I planed here are straight from the mill. So I've actually planed these in my shop. So they're not perfectly 3/4 of an inch. In fact, they probably have some variation within probably 1/32, but it's not much, but it does make a big difference when it comes to centering dowels. So in this particular jig that I made, I actually made 4 perfectly spaced dowels. And I can actually take this, line it up with the center of where I mark my piece of wood, line it up on top here, and then clamp it in place. And you know, it's actually extremely frustrating when you're trying to figure this out on your own. And I spend an inordinate amount of time actually trying to figure out how to do this the same way all the time. This works for me. You might have better suggestions, but this actually has worked quite well on the entire piece. And all I had to do was mark a reference point to make sure that I was using the front edge every single time. But once I had this in place, I was accurately able and very precisely able to put the dowels in through the top of the wood into the piece so that the dowels lined up absolutely perfectly. And in this particular one, I chose 4 dowels across the 16 inches. And on the ends of this piece, I have through dowels that show here, as well as each of the sections for the shelf. So I actually really prefer dowels. There's a lot of different options in terms of how you want to fill the holes and the dowels that you want to use. You can buy these from specialty stores or the big box stores. The problem that I have, particularly with the ones that you buy that are cut like these, is that when you put these in the holes, they're actually a lot looser than the ones that you might buy that come from a company that actually sells woodcraft pieces and accessories. The ones that come actually with the dowel jig kit that I bought have a nice threaded piece that actually sits inside the hole. And what I found on these is that they do vary in size. You really don't want one that you have to bang in, especially if you don't even have glue on it. That's going to expand and probably not be very good, especially if you're very close to the ends of your boards. But you choose the ones that actually fit relatively snugly. And if you kind of get low, you can actually take these and sand these down a little bit and get away with still using them. But I really prefer these over these pieces because when you put the glue on these, it actually allows the glue to go around these little screws and it does come out of the top. And also when you're finishing them off, and especially on a piece like this where these are very exposed and you can actually see the joint and the dowel very clearly, there's not a lot of room for glue to sit around the outside of the dowel. Now I really like that because you almost cannot see a single bit of glue on the dowels that I actually put on the through joints. And I really like that for these particular screw ones. They also have fluted ones that have lines on the sides. You see those very common as well, and people actually like them too. The reason I don't like these as much is actually I did use these on the bottom of this piece just to kind of get a little contrast to see exactly what I liked and what I didn't. And they actually did come out pretty nicely. They stain really nicely. But the problem is there is an actual tiny little bit of glue that you can actually see, even if you sand it flush. So it's just a little bit of guidance and a little bit of experience that I've had with these. But in my personal preference, I really like dowels, particularly for the pieces that I like to have where I show a little contrast. And when I talk a little bit more about this piece in my next video, I hope to have actually the legs so I can show you a little bit about how I chose to put this together and how I like to match that up with the dowels that I have here. So I hope you found this interesting, and thanks for watching.